The charity gala smelled like old money and fresh lies. Crystal chandeliers threw prismatic light across 500 of Chicago's most beautifully corrupt, and Arya Conti moved through them like smoke, quiet, deliberate, invisible. Black gown, hair pinned up, a small clutch purse that held a tracking device, a panic button, and 3 years of controlled rage. She had 11 minutes. She'd rehearsed this 100 times. Get close to Marco Vitelli, plant the tracker on his phone, get out. Simple, clean, no contact with him. The rule she'd given herself the day she started this mission: never look directly at Dante Salvatore. She broke it in 30 seconds. He stood at the far end of the ballroom near the bar, and the room seemed to have tilted slightly to accommodate him. 6'2", broad-shouldered in a black suit that looked like it had been cut for a Renaissance painting. Dark hair swept back, a jaw like carved marble, and those eyes, she'd seen them in photographs for 3 years, but photographs had never managed to capture what they actually were. Storm gray and utterly, completely still. The eyes of a man who had decided long ago that nothing would ever surprise him again. Don't look. Too late. She looked away, recalibrated, found Marco Vitelli near the champagne display, shorter, darker, the kind of watchful energy that made you feel like you were being filed away for later. She began moving toward him with the practiced ease of a woman simply crossing a room. She never reached him, because she collided, hard, with a solid wall of black wool and warm skin, and when she caught herself with one hand braced against a chest, she registered 2 things simultaneously. The heartbeat beneath her palm was perfectly calm, and the eyes looking down at her were storm gray. Of course. I'm so sorry, she said. Her voice was steady. 3 years of practice. You're not. His voice was low. A continental quiet that didn't need volume to fill a room. Italian accented and precise, like every word had been considered before it was released. His hand had closed around her wrist. Not hard, not painful, simply certain, before she'd had time to step back. She felt the moment he noticed the device in her palm. The world stopped. His gaze dropped, came back up, and that perfectly still face rearranged itself into something that was almost curiosity, almost amusement, and entirely dangerous. Interesting accessory, Dante Salvatore said softly. Arya Conti did not panic. She looked him directly in those storm-gray eyes and smiled. I work in tech. Occupational hazard. He studied her the way a wolf studies a rabbit that hasn't run yet, patiently because running was inevitable. I don't believe we've met. We haven't. That's a problem. He plucked the tracking device from her hand with the casual ease of someone removing a speck of lint, turned it between 2 fingers, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. I know everyone at this event. Everyone with reason to be here, and everyone without. A fractional pause. Which are you? Her heart was hammering. She made sure none of it reached her face. I'm a guest of Senator Harlan's office. No, you're not. No heat. No accusation. Just quiet, absolute certainty. You've been watching my consigliere for 20 minutes. You moved to intercept him, and then you ran into me instead. That almost smile again. Did you mean to? I mean everything I do, mister. Salvatore. He said it like she didn't already know, like they were playing a game only he knew the rules to. Dante Salvatore. And you are? She was 3 seconds from bolting. She could feel the exits, 2 sets of doors, a service corridor to her left, the terrace behind him. She'd mapped this room before she'd ever set foot in it. Arya, she said. Just the first name. A concession to the truth, because this man would see through any lie she built on a false foundation. Arya. He tasted the word, his thumb traced once across the inside of her wrist, where her pulse was the only thing betraying her, and his eyes darkened almost imperceptibly. He felt it. Are you here to steal from me, Arya, or destroy me? Both, she thought. Neither. I think there's been a misunderstanding. She stepped back. He let her, which should have been reassuring, and somehow wasn't. She made it 3 steps before his voice found her, low and private, slipping between the chatter and the string quartet and the champagne laughter like it had been aimed precisely at the back of her neck. "Don't make me chase you." A whisper, barely above the noise, meant only for her. She ran anyway. Not a sprint, she was too controlled for that. A swift, fluid exit through the terrace doors, down the side stairs, through the hedge-lined path toward the valet circle. Her heels were in her hand by the second flight. Cold concrete under bare feet. Night air sharp with Lake Michigan wind. She heard no footsteps behind her. She told herself that meant she'd won. She made it exactly 4 steps beyond the valet circle before the black SUV, with no plates, rolled silently to a stop beside her, and the door opened from the inside. Dante Salvatore sat in the back seat, jacket still perfect, glass of whiskey in one hand, like he'd been waiting. "Hello again," he said. She spun. 2 men behind her, not touching her, not threatening her, simply there, a wall of presence that made options disappear one by one. "How?" "I took the shortcut." He tilted his head toward the seat beside him, patient, inevitable. "Get in, Arya. I'll scream, you won't." His voice was almost gentle. "Because you're far too careful to make a scene when you don't know yet what I know about you. And right now?" He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, glass dangling. "I know quite a lot." Her stomach dropped. She got in. The door closed. The city moved past the tinted windows, and Dante Salvatore said nothing at all for a very long time, simply watched her with those storm-gray eyes, calm as a man who had already decided the outcome. "You're not going anywhere," he said at last. "Not tonight." She'd made the apartment in Wicker Park look like no one special lived there. That was the point. The corkboard above her desk, the one hidden behind a false panel in the closet wall, was the real map of her life. Photographs, financial records, shell company flowcharts, a timeline beginning 3 years ago with a single newspaper headline: "Local attorney Marco Conti, 31, found dead." No suspects. Her brother's face, smiling in the corner of the photograph, before everything. Her apartment walls held second-hand furniture, a half-dead succulent, and exactly nothing that would suggest she had been systematically dismantling a crime empire from the inside for 36 months. She'd built her whole life as a disguise, and now Dante Salvatore had brought her to his. His compound sat on the north shore of Chicago, a lakeside estate that didn't look like a fortress, but functioned as one. Stone walls thick enough to stop bullets, security cameras disguised as garden lighting, men who moved like shadows along the perimeter, visible only if you were looking for them. Arya was always looking. The room they'd given her was beautiful, which somehow made it worse. Pale gray silk drapes, a king bed with white linen, a view of the lake that on another night, in another life, would have stolen her breath. She spent the first hour studying the window latches. They're triple reinforced. Marco Vitelli appeared in the doorway without knocking, and his expression managed to convey both courtesy and contempt simultaneously. He was lean and dark and deeply, profoundly skeptical. "And the garden drops 12 feet to a pressure-sensitive lawn. Just so you're oriented." "How thoughtful," Arya said. "Does your boss always kidnap women from charity galas, or is this a special occasion?" "You weren't kidnapped. You were invited." "With the invitation being 2 silent men blocking a public street?" Marco's expression didn't change. "He wanted to talk to you, so he could have called. He didn't have your number." A fractional pause. Yet, she turned back to the window. Outside, the lake was black and restless, catching the compound's perimeter lights in broken silver flashes. She had her phone. She could call Cole, her FBI handler, the man who had recruited her, the man who had been promising her for 3 years that this would all be worth it. She should call him. She didn't. Not yet. Because Dante Salvatore hadn't actually threatened her, hadn't explained himself, and a man who said nothing when he could say everything was more dangerous and more interesting than one who showed his hand. She needed to know what he knew. The knock at her door at 7 the next morning was precise. 3 quiet raps. She opened it to find Dante himself, in dark trousers and a white shirt with the collar open, holding 2 cups of espresso. He looked less like a crime boss, and more like a man who simply existed in his own world on his own terms. He looked, if she was being honest with herself, which she tried never to be about him, devastatingly good in daylight. "I brought coffee," he said. "Since I didn't give you much choice about where you slept, you didn't give me any choice." "True." He held out the cup. She took it because she needed the caffeine, and because refusing small things was a waste of energy she'd need later. He leaned against the doorframe, unhurried. "You want to know why you're here? I want to know why I'm not free to go. Because Vincent Moretti's man photographed you last night." He said it like weather, like a fact that had arrived regardless of anyone's preferences. "He saw you leave with me. In Moretti's world, that makes you mine." A pause. "Which means it makes you a target." Arya studied him. His expression was even. There was no triumph in it, no manipulation she could immediately identify. Just the flat pragmatics of a man who dealt in threats the way other men dealt in spreadsheets. And she dealt in spreadsheets. "So I'm being kept here for my own protection," she said. "Temporarily. And if I walk out? Moretti will have questions. He'll want answers about what you know, who you work for, what you saw." His gaze was level. He's not gentle with his questions. She wrapped her hands around the espresso cup and looked at the lake. "You could simply tell him I'm no one, that it was a coincidence." "I could." He didn't move. "But that would be a lie, Arya." And there it was, her name again, quiet and deliberate, like he was claiming it. "You were targeting Marco. The device you were carrying connects to a surveillance network I'd very much like to understand. So you see, I have questions too." She said nothing. Let the silence breathe. "This is beautiful, by the way." He gestured at the room. Something shifted briefly in his eyes, not softness exactly, but something adjacent to it. "My mother chose it, before she died." He was quiet for exactly 1 beat, no more. "You're free to move through the house. The east wing and the study are off limits. Breakfast is at 8. Dinner is at 7. He straightened, adjusting his cuffs. "My rules. My house. I'm not interested in your rules." He looked at her over his shoulder, and the ghost of that almost smile was back, sharper now, like he'd decided something. "You will be," he said. "In time." He walked away before she could answer. And Arya Conti stood in the doorway of her gilded cage, holding her stolen espresso, and thought, "I need to get into that study. I own this moment," she whispered to herself. "Not him. Never him." "Lie," something in her chest whispered back. The study was on the first floor, east wing, behind a heavy oak door that had a biometric lock and 2 guards. Arya knew this because she spent her first full day in the compound cataloging everything. She was a forensic accountant. Observation was her native language. Every detail was data. The guard rotation shifted at 10 past the hour. Not on the hour. Slightly irregular. Designed to prevent pattern exploitation by anyone who hadn't been watching long enough. The security cameras had a 7-second delay on their recording loop, a vulnerability created by the age of the hardware. The housekeeper, Rosa, moved through the east wing between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, and the guards relaxed fractionally when she did, because Rosa had been with the family for 30 years. Dante's empire, she was beginning to understand, was built on loyalty as much as fear, and that distinction mattered. She'd learned pieces of the Salvatore operation over 3 years of remote analysis, shell companies, real estate holdings, import businesses that moved goods alongside other things that weren't listed on manifests. What she hadn't understood from spreadsheets was the human architecture of it. The way Dante's men didn't just follow orders, they believed in him. The way Marco ran the household like a quiet general, anticipating needs before they were voiced. The way the compound's kitchen fed not only the family, but the families of every man on payroll. That she hadn't expected. She found Dante in the main room late that afternoon, standing at a long table covered in maps and documents, Marco at his side and 2 other men she didn't recognize flanking them. The conversation stopped when she appeared in the doorway. Arya, not surprised, not displeased. "Come in. I was looking for the library," she said. "Second door on the right." He held her gaze. "But since you're here..." He didn't clear the table. Either he trusted her that much already, or he'd moved the sensitive material before she arrived. She suspected the latter. She moved into the room with the careful ease she'd trained herself into, and felt every man at that table track her with the calculating attention of people who trusted no one new. "Tell me something," Dante said, watching her look at the map spread across the table, a city grid, districts marked in different colors. "Chicago. What does a woman who carries a tracking device to a charity gala do for work?" "Financial consulting." "Not untrue. I audit corporate accounts." "Which firm?" "Hale and Renner." "Real. Legitimate." Her cover, built brick by brick. Marco's eyes moved to Dante. Something passed between them, quick, coded. "I know that firm," Dante said. "Not accusatory. Exploratory. They hold accounts for several of my legitimate businesses." "I know," she thought. "That's how I found you." "Then we may have met professionally," she said. "In the numbers." Something almost amused moved across his face. "Perhaps." He straightened, rolled up the map. The other men drifted out with the quiet efficiency of people who understood when a room was being reduced. Only Marco stayed, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching her like a question he hadn't finished asking. "What do you know about Vincent Moretti, Arya?" The question landed carefully. She let it sit for a beat. "The name from last night. Your rival, among other things." He moved to the window, that same measured unhurriedness, like the world operated on his schedule. "He's been moving on my territories for 4 months, burning supply routes, threatening business owners, killing my men." A pause. 3 weeks ago, he killed a man named Paolo Conti. Arya's blood went still. Paolo, her uncle. She hadn't known. Cole hadn't told her. "Unrelated to you?" Dante asked. His voice was quiet, but his eyes were sharp. She kept her face a painting. "The name means nothing to me." He watched her for 1 second longer than comfortable. He let it go. "You should know that Moretti doesn't make distinctions between targets and bystanders. Anyone in my orbit becomes a liability in his eyes, which means..." He turned to face her fully. "You are genuinely in danger here. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it so you understand why my rules exist." She looked at him. At the straight line of his jaw, the controlled precision of him, the way he delivered catastrophic information in the same tone most men used for weather reports. "What about my job?" she asked. "My life? I can't just disappear. I've had your absence covered." He said it with the calm ease of a man who rearranged realities before breakfast. "Rosa called your office. Family emergency. You have the week." Arya stared at him. "I'd recommend not wasting it," he added, and walked out. That night, in the dark of her room with the lake murmuring against the compound walls, she opened the secret compartment in the heel of her shoe and looked at the USB drive she'd never let out of her possession. 3 years of financial evidence. Shell accounts, money trails, enough to bring down the Salvatore operation brick by brick. She thought about Paolo, about her brother Marco, 3 years dead, about the mission she'd given her life to. She thought about Dante Salvatore's gray eyes saying, "I don't say that to frighten you." And she thought about something else. Something that had been needling at the edges of her certainty all day like a splinter she couldn't reach. The financial trail she'd spent 3 years following had led her to Dante. But today, Marco had mentioned a name in passing during the map discussion, a name she'd seen in one of the secondary accounts, buried 3 layers deep. Richard Cole, an American name, in an Italian ledger. She lay awake until 2 in the morning, turning that splinter over in her mind. In the garden below her window, shadows moved. Not Dante's men. The gate was wrong. The formation too spread, too predatory. Someone was watching the compound from outside. Someone's already here, she thought, and pulled out her panic button and did not press it because she needed to think, and thinking was the only weapon she had left. She found him at 4 in the morning. She hadn't meant to. She'd been moving toward the east wing with the careful patience of someone playing a long game, testing the changed guard rotation she'd identified, and she rounded the corner of the main corridor and walked directly into a scene she hadn't prepared for. Dante sat on the floor of the hallway outside a closed door, back against the wall, knees bent, a glass of whiskey untouched on the hardwood beside him. Not sitting like a boss, sitting like a man who'd been carrying something too heavy for too long and had simply run out of road. He looked up when he heard her. His expression was different, not the controlled mask she'd catalogued. Something raw, something that didn't know it was supposed to be hidden. "Can't sleep?" she asked, before she'd decided whether speaking was wise. "Never in this wing." He looked at the door. "My sister's room. She didn't move, didn't retreat. What was her name?" "Sophia." He said it like it cost him. She was 22. Moretti's predecessor had her killed. As a message. He picked up the whiskey, didn't drink it, set it back down. "I was supposed to protect her. That was supposed to be the point of all of this." He gestured vaguely. At the house, at the empire, at 35 years of ruthless accumulation. So much for that. Arya Conti, who had spent 3 years building walls around her grief, sat down on the floor beside him. She didn't know why. She just did. They sat in the dark hallway in silence, for a long moment, and she felt the warmth radiating off him, the solid physical reality of a man who took up space in the world, and the strange quiet gravity of a man who was, in this moment, simply human. "I lost my brother," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. 3 years ago. He turned his head, looked at her with those gray eyes in the dark, and she saw something shift in them, not the hunter's calculation, but recognition, the mutual recognition of grief. "How?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. And that was the most honest thing she'd said to him. "That's what I'm trying to find out." He was quiet for a moment. Then, very slowly, he reached over and covered her hand with his. Not possessive, not claiming, just present. A warm, solid weight. Her first instinct was to move her hand away. She didn't. They stayed like that in the dark hallway outside Sophia's door, and Arya thought, with a cold clarity that frightened her, this is the most dangerous moment of the last 3 years. Not because he'd threatened her. Because he hadn't. She didn't know how much time passed. Long enough for the whiskey to warm. Long enough for the guard rotation to complete twice. When she finally stood, her legs had stiffened, and he rose with her in one fluid motion, and they stood close, too close, the kind of proximity that has its own gravity. His hand was still holding hers. She looked up at him. He looked down at her, and something electric and irrevocable moved through the air between them. "You should sleep," he said. His voice was different, rougher. "So should you?" He reached up with his free hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so unexpectedly tender from a man like him that it knocked the breath from her like a physical blow. "Why are you still looking for answers about your brother, Arya?" he murmured. "After 3 years?" "Because I don't stop," she said. "I don't know how." "No," he agreed, and something in his gaze said neither do I. "That makes 2 of us." His hand curved along her jaw. She felt every centimeter of it. Warm, rough, careful. The hands of a man who knew exactly how much damage he was capable of, and was choosing carefully. When he kissed her, it wasn't a collision. It was a question. Slow and searching, his mouth against hers, and she answered it before she'd decided to, her lips moving against his with the helpless honesty of something she'd been suppressing for days, that she couldn't suppress any longer. He kissed like a man who had learned to take his time at everything. She kissed him back like a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to want something for herself. When it ended, they stood forehead to forehead in the dark. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "The worst one I've ever had," he agreed. His hand was still cradling her face. She felt his thumb brush her cheekbone. Once, twice. "Go to sleep, Arya," he said quietly. "I'll burn the world for you if I have to, But tonight, please. Just sleep. She walked back to her room in the dark, pressed her back against the closed door, and breathed. 3 years, she reminded herself. Don't let one corridor unmake 3 years. But her hand still felt warm where he'd held it, and she didn't sleep at all. The dinner was his idea of a test. She recognized it the moment she walked into the dining room and found 8 people arranged around a table that gleamed with crystal and silence. Marco, who she knew. 3 other lieutenants she'd studied in photographs. 2 women, the wives of men she'd tracked in ledgers. And at the head, Dante, who stood when she entered and held her chair himself, and the look he gave her was so profoundly steady that she almost felt it in her sternum. The meal was careful, civil, beautiful, even, braised lamb and hand-pulled pasta, red wine that cost more than her monthly rent, candlelight softening the hard faces around the table. She knew what this was. A display. A presentation. She is here. She matters. Conduct yourselves accordingly. She ate. She spoke when spoken to. She was warm and precise and charming in exactly the degree required, because she had practiced this too, the art of being exactly as visible as you chose. Marco watched her throughout the meal with the quiet, relentless attention of a man filing a very long document. It was dessert when it happened. The Hale and Renner firm, he said, conversationally, as if the thought had just arrived. I looked into it after yesterday's conversation. She kept her expression easy. Oh? They were contracted to audit Meridian Holdings 2 years ago, one of our shell entities. His eyes didn't leave her. Curious coincidence, isn't it? The table went still in that imperceptible way, the way rooms went still in the presence of predators, everyone suddenly very conscious of breath. Arya set down her fork with the kind of careful precision that looked like calm and was actually calculation. She had 2 seconds to decide her play. Not a coincidence, she said. I was part of that audit team. Steady. Direct. Don't flinch. I noticed discrepancies in the accounts. I flagged them internally. My senior partner told me to let them go. She looked at Dante. I did. Because I wasn't ready. Because I'm careful. And I was still building a picture. The silence was different now. Not hostile. Something sharper. Interested. A picture of what? Dante asked. He was very still. Of who has been moving money through legitimate firms to fund things they shouldn't be funding. She held his gaze. I'm not after you specifically, Dante. Half-truth, half-truth, half-truth. I'm after the network. Your empire is one thread of a much longer string. Marco made a sound that might have been skepticism. She's telling the truth, Dante said, not looking away from her. Or enough of it. Breathe. I have questions, he continued, but not tonight. He looked at his men, a subtle instruction that moved across the table like a current, and conversation resumed, and the danger passed the way weather passed, leaving everything rearranged. After dinner, in the hallway, Marco caught her arm. Not rough, not gentle, just certain. He trusts you, Marco said, low enough for only her to hear. That's not something he extends lightly. It costs him something to do it. If it turns out to be a mistake, he let the silence finish the sentence. It won't be, she said. And the terrible thing was that she meant it, even though her entire mission was a contradiction of that promise. Later, she stood at Dante's study door, not the east wing, the main study, and knocked. He opened it, looked at her. I need to see the Meridian Holdings accounts, she said. A long moment. Then he stepped back and let her in. They worked for 3 hours, side by side at his desk. Her financial instincts and his empire's geography merging into a map of something she hadn't seen the full shape of before. Money moving from shell to shell, yes, but not the way she'd assumed. Not moving into Dante. Moving through him. Someone else had been using his infrastructure. Someone on the outside who had access to his network. Richard Cole's name again. 3 layers deep. Buried but there. She said nothing, kept her face forward, but her hands, hidden under the desk, curled into fists. She heard movement outside the window. Dante heard it too. He was on his feet before she registered the shift in his posture, hand inside his jacket, eyes on the glass. The shadow passed. Eyes on the perimeter, he said quietly into his earpiece. Then, to her, someone's been surveilling the compound for 48 hours. Moretti's people, how close are they getting? Close enough to be annoying, not close enough to matter. Yet, he looked at her. This changes in the next 48 hours. There will be movement. She swallowed. Looked back at the screen. Whatever's coming, he said quietly. You stay inside. Understood? Understood, she said. And under the desk, her fingers found the USB drive in her pocket. Turned it over. Once. Twice. Who's using his empire, Marco? She thought. And why did Cole never tell me there was someone else? The attack came at midnight. 3 vehicles. Fast and dark. Moretti's men, 8 of them, armed and coming over the south wall like they'd been given a map of the blind spots. They'd been given a map of the blind spots. She understood that now, watching from the window as muzzle flashes strobed through the garden like malign lightning. His men were faster. Dante was faster. She saw him cross the garden, no jacket, shirt sleeves, moving through the firefight with the brutal economy of someone for whom violence was simply another language. 2 men down. 3. He moved between cover points without hesitation, calling coordinates into his earpiece, and there was no confusion in him. No fear, just the cold, consuming competence of a man in complete possession of his own darkness. She should have stayed in her room. She'd picked up the firearm from the safe beneath the dresser, the one she'd found on the second day, the one she very much was not supposed to know existed, and she moved down the servants' staircase while the firefight raged. The man she found in the kitchen corridor hadn't seen her yet. She didn't give him the chance. The butt of the gun connected with the back of his skull cleanly. He dropped. She stepped over him, cleared the next room, and came out the back door to find Dante 10 feet away, blood on his shirt, a gun in one hand and absolute fury in his gray eyes when he saw her. I told you to stay inside, he said. There was one in the kitchen. She held his gaze. You're welcome. He stared at her for one long, scorching second. Around them, his men finished the work. Car engines, shouted commands, the compound shuddering back into enforced order. And Dante Salvatore crossed the 10 feet between them in 3 steps, took her face in both hands, blood-warm palms against her cheeks, and kissed her with the desperate, furious relief of a man who had thought, just for a fractional moment, that he might have lost her. She dropped the gun. Her hands found the front of his shirt. She kissed him back with everything she had. When he finally broke the kiss, he pressed his forehead to hers, breathing hard, and the words came out rough and unguarded and completely unplanned. Mine. Not a command. A revelation. Like he'd looked down and found something he hadn't known he'd been missing. You are mine, Arya. I don't care what brought you here or what you want from me or what you're keeping. This, right now, is real, she said. Her voice cracked on it. I know. He pulled back and looked at her in the chaotic dark, studied her like he was trying to memorize her. I'm falling in love with you, he said. The absolute simplicity of it. A man who dealt in ruthless precision, applying it to the one thing that had never been simple in his life. I don't say things I don't mean, so understand what I'm telling you. Arya looked at him, at the blood on his shirt, and the gray of his eyes, and the open, terrifying truth of his face, and felt everything she'd built over 3 years develop a crack right down the center. I know, she whispered again, and it was the truest thing she'd ever said. Tell me you're safe, he said. Tell me nothing tonight has hurt you. I'm fine. Arya, I promise. He wrapped his arms around her and held her against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat, still elevated, slowly settling, and she closed her eyes and let herself have this one moment. I'm sorry, she thought. For which part of the lie she was apologizing, she couldn't entirely tell anymore. Marco appeared in the doorway behind them. Dante. His voice was controlled but tight. We need to talk. Dante looked up. Something in Marco's face made his arms tighten briefly around Arya before he released her. They knew where the blind spots were, Marco said. The camera delay, the rotation schedule. Dante's face went still. Someone told them, someone very close. A long, terrible silence. Arya thought about Richard Cole's name in the ledger. Oh no, she thought. Oh no. War is coming, Dante said quietly. He looked at his city, his compound, his empire, and then at her. And there's a traitor in my house. The next 3 days were the organized violence of men who had been preparing for war their whole lives. Maps. Phone calls. Men arriving in unmarked cars and leaving with orders. The compound transformed. Not chaotic, but precise. Like a machine cycling up to full power. Dante moved through it all with the quiet control of a man who had been born for this, who had built every piece of his empire with exactly this moment in mind. Arya watched, catalogued, and felt for the first time in 3 years genuinely terrified, not of Dante, but for him, because she had looked at the ledger again last night. Looked at Cole's name 3 layers deep, in a shell account structure that didn't belong to the Salvatore family's legitimate holdings. Looked at the dates. Looked at what those accounts had funded. And she had begun to understand something that rearranged everything she thought she knew. She needed to tell him. She knew she needed to tell him. She hadn't yet, because telling him meant telling him everything. The mission, the 3 years, the USB drive in her pocket, the fact that she had arrived at his gala not as a bystander but as a blade aimed at his throat. She was still deciding how much of herself she was willing to destroy to give him the truth. The decision was made for her. Her phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. Lucia. She answered it in the garden, stepping away from the nearest guard, and Lucia's voice came through in tight, controlled panic. Arya. There are 2 men outside my apartment. I don't know them. They're watching my door. I'm scared. Don't open the door. Don't go outside. The line went dead. Arya ran. Not through the front gate. She wasn't stupid, and she wasn't suicidal. Through the servants' entrance, into the side street, flag a cab. She was moving before she'd fully processed the decision. Because Lucia had no idea what world Arya had been orbiting for 3 years, and Lucia was going to get hurt because of her. And that was the one line she would never allow. To be crossed. She'd made it 4 blocks when the black car slid alongside her. Not Dante's car. Different. Window rolling down. The man inside was someone she'd never seen, but the accent was Chicago, and the eyes were Moretti's, that particular brand of cold intelligence that she recognized from 3 years of staring at surveillance photographs. Miss Conti, the man said. Vinny wants a word. She had 1 second. She thought about running. She thought about Lucia, with 2 men at her door. She got in the car. Back at the compound, Dante was in his study when Marco walked in with the phone. On the screen, security footage of the side street. Arya stepping into a dark car. Not his. He was standing before Marco finished speaking. It's Moretti's vehicle, Marco said. Dante's face did something that the people who knew him would have recognized. Not rage. Not yet. The perfect, terrible stillness that came before it. The eye of the storm. Pull everything, he said. Every asset. Every favor owed. Every gun we have. He buttoned his jacket. And find her. Now. Dante. Marco's voice was careful. There's something else. About the leak. I've been tracing it. The camera delay. The rotation schedule. How Moretti knew our blind spots. He laid a tablet on the desk. A financial record. Someone has been feeding Moretti information for 8 months. Using a communications channel that routes through. Dante looked at the screen. He went very still. The FBI handler, Marco said quietly. Richard Cole. The name dropped into the room like a stone into water. Cole. Dante repeated. He has a contact in our network. He's been using your infrastructure, without your knowledge, to move his own assets while feeding your vulnerabilities to Moretti. Marco paused. And I think, he pulled up a second document. I think the Conti woman knows. Dante stared at the screen. His jaw was tight enough to shatter. She came to the gala with a tracking device, Marco said. But not one designed to expose you, Dante. Designed to trace the communications routed through your network. She was following Cole's money, not yours. The silence was absolute. She lost her brother, Dante said slowly. 3 years ago. Marco Conti. Attorney. The hit was ordered by. Don't. Dante's voice was quiet as a shut door. I know who ordered it. He already knew. He'd known for 3 years that something about that night had been wrong, that the man they'd killed had tried to say something in those last moments that hadn't made sense. He'd buried the doubt under years of justification. But a killed man's sister had been quietly, patiently, brilliantly following the truth all the way to his front door. Find her, he said. Find her right now. And Dante Salvatore walked out of his study, out of his compound, and into the war that was coming for them both. Moretti's warehouse was on the south side, industrial, unremarkable, the kind of building that had changed purpose 3 times in 30 years, and remembered none of them. Inside, it smelled like rust and cold concrete and old water. Arya sat in the metal chair with her wrists zip-tied and her head clear. Pain was information. She catalogued it, a bruise forming along her left cheekbone, where one of Moretti's men had been impatient. Her phone gone, her clutch gone, the USB drive, still in her shoe, because she'd moved it when she got in the car, a habit she'd built for exactly this kind of moment. Across the room, Vincent Moretti paced. He was shorter than she'd expected from the photographs, compact, with small clever eyes, and the restless energy of a man who'd clawed everything he had from the bottom up, and never quite trusted that it wouldn't be taken back. The Salvatore boss, he said. You're sleeping with him. That's a reductive summary of a complicated situation. He stopped pacing, looked at her with those small, cold eyes. You were at the gala to get intel. For who? No one. Wrong answer. He nodded, and someone grabbed the back of her chair. She breathed through it, kept her eyes forward, kept her hands still. He doesn't know about Cole, she realized. He thinks he's using Cole, but Cole is using him. Moretti was the distraction, the army Cole had deployed against Dante to keep the heat off while he ran his own operation through both their networks. I can give you something better than Salvatore, she said, when the man released her chair. Moretti turned. There's a federal agent running assets through both your infrastructure and his. He's been setting you up for a fall since before this war started. He wants you to destroy each other. She kept her voice even. I have evidence. On a drive. If you let me go, I'll give it to you, and you can decide what to do with it. Moretti stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You've got nerve. I'll give you that. I'm telling you the truth. Maybe. He resumed pacing. But I'm not letting you go. Because having Dante Salvatore's woman is worth more than whatever's on your little drive. He snapped his fingers. Lock her up. They put her in a room off the main floor. A storage room, metal shelving, a drain in the floor, a single bulb overhead, not locked with an electronic system, old hardware, a padlock through a hasp. She spent 20 minutes finding a screw loose enough on the shelving unit to work free from the bracket. 25 minutes working the hasp, slower without full feeling in her wrists. 30 minutes to get the door open. She was in the hallway, moving, quiet, sock feet on concrete, when she heard them coming back. Too many footsteps. Too fast. Okay. New plan. She found the fire door. Pushed through. Came out into a loading area, night air cold against her face, the city's ambient glow orange above the roofline. She'd made it 40 feet across the lot when the compound lights blazed on. Run. She ran. Meanwhile, 6 miles north, Dante moved through his city like a man remade. Marco had put every resource into the search. Phone traces, street cameras, informants calling in from the corners. The body of Moretti's man they'd taken alive outside the compound was providing coordinates, one carefully obtained answer at a time. The traitor in the house had been identified, a second-tier logistics man named Gallo, who had been feeding Moretti information in exchange for debts cleared. Gallo was no longer a concern. Cole was the concern. Cole was the target. But first, we've got the warehouse, Marco said from the passenger seat, tablet in hand, eyes on the screen. Dante drove without answering. His hands on the wheel were perfectly steady. His mind was already in the building, already moving through the variables, already calculating what he was going to do to the men who had put their hands on her. She's already out, one of his scouts said through the earpiece. She got herself out of the storage room. She's on the east lot. Dante put the car in park before it had fully stopped. She heard the cars before she saw them. Not Moretti's vehicles. Wrong approach angle, wrong speed. Too fast, too certain. The cars that came from nowhere like the city had spat them out fully formed, pulling across the lot in a hard semicircle, cutting off the men who'd come through the fire door behind her. Dante was out of the lead car before it stopped. She saw him across 30 feet of dark asphalt, and something happened in her chest that 3 years of walls couldn't contain. A crack so wide and so fundamental that it reshaped everything behind it. He was across the lot in seconds. His hands found her face the same way they had in the garden, immediately, consuming, like checking that she was real. His eyes moved across her, the bruise, the torn wrists, the barefoot concrete dirty reality of what the last hours had been, and she watched something go from controlled to feral in the space of a breath. "Don't," she said quietly. "I'm okay. You're not okay." His voice was barely a sound. "I'm standing on my own 2 feet. In a crime lord's parking lot. I'm fine." Behind him, his men were efficient and merciless. This was not a negotiation. This was a message being delivered in the only language Moretti understood. It took less than 4 minutes. She didn't look away, because she had spent 3 years building herself into someone who didn't look away from hard things, and she owed both of them the truth of his nature. When it was done, Dante came back to her. The shirt was worse now. He didn't seem to notice. "Your friend is safe," he said. "Marco had men on her before you'd been gone 20 minutes. Arya closed her eyes briefly, released a breath she'd been holding for hours. "Thank you," I thought. He stopped. His jaw worked. A rare moment of imprecision from a man who was never imprecise. When I saw the footage, when I understood, Dante, she took his face in her hands. His eyes met hers, and she saw it all. The fear he'd never admit to, the rage that was already reorganizing itself into grief, the love that had landed in him like a structural change and couldn't be undone. "Listen to me. I need to tell you something. All of it. Everything." "I know," he said. She blinked. "Marco worked it out," he said quietly. "The tracking device. Cole's money through my infrastructure. Your brother." He held her gaze. "I know." The ground shifted. "I didn't order it," he said. The words came out with the weight of something he'd been carrying for a long time, without knowing its shape. That night, 3 years ago, the man we were targeting used a bystander. A man who was in the wrong place. I didn't know his name until today. His voice was rough. "I am sorry. I know that's not enough. But I am." Arya Conti stood in a Southside parking lot, with blood on her hands and bruises forming on her face, and 3 years of grief cracking open around her like ice in spring. "Cole," she said. "It was Cole. He orchestrated it. He put your man and my brother in the same place. Because he needed the hit to happen. And he needed someone to blame. She watched him absorb it. He's been using your empire as a laundering system and mine as a weapon aimed at you. He wanted us destroying each other so he could run his operation clean." A long, long silence. "Where is he?" Dante asked. "I have 3 years of financial records on a USB drive that answers that question in detail." He looked at her. And then, in the parking lot, in the dark, with his city burning quietly around them, he said, "Never leaving you again. Do you understand me? Whatever you decide after this, whatever you choose." "I know," she said. For the 3rd time, and this time it meant something entirely different than the first 2. She pressed the USB drive into his hand. "One of us might die tonight," she said, looking toward the city. "Cole has resources. Federal protection. This isn't going to be clean." "No," Dante agreed. "It rarely is." He took her hand. They walked back to the car together. Cole's operation ran out of a building in River North that, on paper, belonged to a cybersecurity consulting firm. Arya had the shell company traced in 40 minutes, with Dante's resources added to her own. 3 years of work, consolidated, confirmed, and mapped in one long night at a table, surrounded by people who had started as her enemies. They went in at dawn. Cole had 7 men. Federal contractors, technically off-book, the kind of asset that existed in the gray space between official and catastrophically illegal. Men who answered to no oversight and carried weapons that weren't registered. Dante had Marco, and 12 of the most efficient men in Chicago. And Arya, who carried a firearm with the surety of someone who had been practicing for exactly this for 3 years, and had finally arrived at the reason. The building cleared floor by floor. Precise. Violent. Over quickly, the way things were over quickly when one side had something deeply personal to settle. She found Cole on the 3rd floor, in a communications room surrounded by monitors and servers, and the kind of sophisticated equipment that told her he'd been running this for years before she'd been recruited. He didn't look surprised to see her. "You found the ledger," he said. "I found everything," she said. He reached for the desk drawer. She shot it out of his hand before he touched it. The room went quiet. Cole stared at his hand. A graze, not deep, more shock than damage, and then at her, with the specific outrage of a man who has always been the predator and is encountering, for the first time, the experience of being prey. "You recruited me," she said. Her voice was steady. "You told me Dante Salvatore ordered my brother's death. You handed me a mission and pointed me like a weapon, and you killed him yourself. Why?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Your brother found the accounts. He was an attorney, he was building a case. So you had him killed and framed a crime boss, so you could use me to dismantle the only man with enough resources to investigate you." She took a step forward. "How long?" 8 years. Flat. Unapologetic. "I built the cleanest laundering network in the country, running through 3 crime families who had no idea I existed. You think federal salary covers what I need? You think. I think you killed my brother," she said. "I think you killed him and gave me a lie to live inside for 3 years. And I think you are going to answer for it." He moved. Fast, trained, practiced, desperate. Dante came through the door faster. 3 seconds. Cole down, disarmed, face against the floor, Dante's knee in his back with the particular calm of a man who has been waiting for exactly this. "I believe," Dante said quietly, "that the FBI has a very interested audience for everything on those servers." He looked up at Marco, who stood in the doorway. "Make the calls." "Already done," Marco said. It took 40 minutes for the federal agents, the real ones, the ones who had been investigating Cole's operation from a different angle for a year, to arrive. The evidence on the servers filled the gaps in cases that had been open for the better part of a decade. Cole went out in handcuffs, into a federal car, and Arya watched him from the street. The morning light was coming in cold and clear off the lake, and the city was waking up around them, and Lucia was safe, and Cole was in custody, and her brother's name would be cleared. "It's finally over." She said the words quietly, to herself, to the morning, to the 3-year ghost she'd been carrying. Dante's arm came around her from behind. He said nothing. He was good at that, at being present without requiring language from it. She leaned back against him. "Moretti?" she asked. "Retreating. Without Cole's intelligence stream, his offensive capabilities are significantly reduced." Marco appeared at her other side. "We'll consolidate over the next month. The territories will stabilize." "And Gallo?" "No longer a concern," she nodded. She didn't ask for details. She was learning which questions she needed to ask, and which were answers she already had. "What happens now?" she said to Dante. His arms tightened around her. Now, he said, we figure out what we're building. She looked out at the Chicago morning, at the city that had been the stage for her grief and her mission, and entirely against her meticulous plans, her heart. I'm going to need a new job, she said. You can audit my real books, he said. God knows they could use the attention. She laughed, the first real, unguarded laugh she'd had in years. It surprised her. She felt it in her chest like something waking up. That's not a job, she said. That's a trap. Yes, Dante agreed. It is. 6 weeks later, the compound no longer felt like a cage. She wasn't sure when the shift had happened. Not a single moment, but a slow accumulation of them. Rosa teaching her how to make her mother's braised rabbit recipe. Marco, who had distrusted her with the thoroughness of a man whose job was distrusting people, stopping her in the hallway one morning to say simply, "You did good, Conti," before walking away. The room that had been her prison becoming the room where she worked, her board replaced with a new one. This one devoted to auditing Dante's legitimate holdings and untangling the mess Cole's interference had left in his financial infrastructure. She was good at it. Better, even, than she'd been at building a case against him. It turned out that righteous fury was excellent motivation, but love was better architecture. Love. She'd stopped fighting the word around week 3. It had arrived in her vocabulary with the same quiet inevitability as him. No announcement, no dramatic declaration. Simply there one morning when she woke up and he was already in the kitchen making espresso, and the sight of his broad shoulders against the morning light made something in her go. Warm and irrevocably settled. Lucia had met Marco, which had created a separate set of complications that were ongoing and, if Arya was being honest, deeply entertaining. The Moretti situation had resolved in the way the powerful resolved things, negotiated terms, territorial acknowledgement, enough face-saving on both sides that the war stayed cold. Dante had sent a message that didn't need words. The intelligence advantage is gone. The price of continued conflict is higher than the gain. Moretti was pragmatic. He received the message. It was a Tuesday evening when Dante asked her to come to his study. The main study, not the East Wing. The working room full of maps and a fireplace, and the particular smell of old books and good whiskey that she had come to associate entirely with him. He was standing by the fireplace when she walked in, jacket on, tie straight, which was unusual for a Tuesday at home. He turned when she entered, and the look on his face was something she hadn't seen before, stripped of all the control and the precision, just him. Open and slightly nervous in a way that transformed the most dangerous man in Chicago into something human and terrifying and breathtaking. "Sit down," he said. "Are you actually nervous?" she said. "Arya, you're nervous. I've seen you calmly supervise extremely alarming situations without blinking, and you're nervous right now." "Arya." She sat down. He reached into his jacket pocket, set 3 things on the coffee table between them. 1, a ring, platinum band, a dark blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the stone the exact color of the lake at dusk, old and perfect and clearly chosen with extraordinary care. 2, a gun, his, engraved on the grip, which she understood was a Salvatore family tradition she'd read about in Marco's household notes. And 3, a small folded paper, which turned out to be, when she opened it, her brother's original case file. Closed. Officially. His name cleared, the death attributed correctly in the public record. She looked at the 3 things on the table, looked up at Dante, who was watching her with those gray eyes and that terrifying openness. "Salvatore tradition," he said. 3 offerings. The ring for intention. The weapon for protection. I give you mine, which means my life is in your hands as much as yours is in mine. And the 3rd, he gestured at the paper. Something owed. Something I couldn't give back. But the record is corrected. His name is what it should be. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. "Marry me," he said. "Or don't. I'm not going to tell you this is simple or safe or any of the things you deserved and didn't get. My world is what it is. You know exactly what that means now." He crouched down in front of her, and this close, she could see every line of him, the earned hardness and the rare tenderness, and the absolute unguarded truth of a man making the most important gamble of his life. But I want you in it, permanently, completely. She picked up the ring, turned it in her fingers. That proposal had no preamble about love in it at all, she said. You know I love you. I want to hear it. He took the ring from her fingers and slid it onto hers himself. I love you, he said. I loved you when you ran from me at the gala. I loved you in the hallway outside Sophia's room. I loved you when you shot the lock mechanism on Cole's desk with better aim than half my men. A fractional pause. I loved you when I realized you'd been trying to destroy me for 3 years and couldn't quite manage it. I almost managed it, she said. You almost managed everything. He was still crouching, his hands around hers, and he looked up at her with the particular expression she had decided was her favorite thing in the entire world. Say yes, Arya. She looked at the ring, at the gun, at her brother's name, finally clean on paper after 3 years. Marry me, she said, or I'll audit your wine cellar next. He laughed. The real one, rare and full and unguarded, the one that only she seemed able to produce. Then he stood and pulled her up with him, and when he kissed her this time there was nothing tentative about it, nothing searching. It was a promise, absolute and unhurried and permanent. Cara mia, he murmured against her mouth. What did I do to deserve you? You chased me, she said, even though I warned you not to. 8 months later. The wedding was not small. That had never been a realistic option, not for the Salvatore family, not in a city that ran on relationships and signals and the careful theater of power. 400 guests filled the historic lakeside venue, and the flowers were white and deep blue and entirely too extravagant, and Rosa had cried since 6 a.m, and Marco had been managing the guest list like a military operation since before dawn. Arya stood at the window of the bridal suite and looked out at the lake. It was the same lake she'd stared at from her cage on the first morning. The same silver surface, the same relentless movement, the same gray-blue depth. How strange, she thought, to end here. Not end. The word was wrong. Begin here. Lucia appeared at her shoulder, resplendent in deep blue bridesmaid silk, and completely failing to suppress a smile that had been escalating since they'd arrived. You know, she said, when you told me you'd been secretly dismantling a crime empire for 3 years and had accidentally fallen in love with the boss, I thought you were being dramatic. I'm never dramatic. You're standing in a $5,000 dress about to marry the most dangerous man in Chicago because you tried to destroy him and couldn't. That's a reductive summary of a complicated situation. It's a romantic summary. Lucia squeezed her shoulder. Marco won't admit it, but he told me last week that in 30 years of service to the Salvatore family, he has never seen Dante happy. Not genuinely. Not like this. She looked at Arya's reflection. You did that. He did that too, she thought. He loved me first, even before I was finished being his enemy. The ceremony was in the main hall, and the moment she appeared in the doorway, Marco at her side, which had been Dante's idea, a gesture of family acknowledgement so layered she'd had to think about it for a full day before she understood it, she found him immediately. He stood at the altar in a dark suit, and he watched her walk toward him the way he'd watched her from across a ballroom 8 months ago, with the absolute still attention of a man who has stopped being surprised by anything in the world except her. She walked to him. He took her hand. You're not running, he said, quietly enough that only she could hear it. I ran once, she said. Look where it got me. Something warm moved across his face. Exactly where you were supposed to be. They said the words. The old words, the Salvatore family's traditional additions, the blood oath, brief and formal, a small cut on each palm pressed together, and the strange, fierce significance of it moved through her like an electrical current. This is his world. My world, now. She had thought, once, that marrying into power meant disappearing into it. She had been wrong. Signora Salvatore, Marco had called her that morning when she'd passed him in the corridor. And then, very quietly, Bene. Good. The highest compliment available from a man whose vocabulary of approval was extremely sparse. The reception was what it needed to be. Beautiful, abundant, loud with the particular music of people who loved each other well. Rosa danced with the head chef. Lucia and Marco orbited each other with the careful deliberateness of two people pretending not to be inevitable. Dante found her on the terrace at midnight, slipping away from the crowd with the ease of a man who had always known how to disappear when he chose to. He stood beside her at the railing with their shoulders touching and the lake moving darkly below them, and she felt the exact weight of the moment. The full circle of it. This place. This view. This man who had whispered a warning to a woman in a ballroom and chased her anyway. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About the gala," she said. "About running. Best decision you ever made." "I ran away from you." "Yes," he agreed, looking out at the lake, "and I followed." He turned to look at her, and his face in the moonlight was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. All the darkness and the grace and the love that he kept only for her. Unwrapped now. Permanent. With no more reason for it to hide. "I will always follow." She leaned into his side. "Amore mio," she said quietly. His arm came around her waist, pulled her close. He pressed a kiss to her temple, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world, which he did now. They both did. "Any regrets?" he asked. She thought about 3 years of grief, about her brother's name, clean again, about a hallway at 4 a.m, and an espresso shared at a doorframe, and a USB drive pressed into a warm palm, and the exact moment she'd realized that the man she'd built her rage around was the only man she'd ever wanted to walk toward. "One," she said. He tensed almost imperceptibly. "I should have kissed you at the gala," she said, "instead of running. I wasted approximately 8 months. He laughed again, that full, rare, wonderful sound, and turned her in his arms and kissed her there on the terrace with the lake moving below them and the music drifting out from inside and the city spread endlessly under the stars. When he broke the kiss, he pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt his heartbeat under her hand, steady, strong, hers. "You ran," he said quietly. "I chased. And here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. "Here we are, at the end of the chase, at the beginning of everything, and somewhere in Chicago, in a life she had built from the ruins of a plan that had never been about this, never been about warmth and belonging and the terrifying joy of a hand that reached for you in the dark." Aria Salvatore closed her eyes and breathed and stayed, not because she was caged, because she chose to.